One thing that you did mention during that time was a name that is also, I grew up loving his films, and I would always go up to my brother's house in Nevada, in Reno, and he would always, every time I would come up, we would watch a new film, and then we watched The Fury, and
Wow.
I think I've seen that movie over, I don't know, 50 times, 60 times, and then all of his films, and you've done so many. If I throw out the name Brian DePalma, what comes to your mind?
Wow. Well, I was a huge fan of DePalma when I was going to film school at the University of South Carolina and studying Hitchcock and everything. And Brian's, one of his early films, Sisters, was just blew me away. It had a lot of Hitchcockian things in it. It had a score by Bernard Herrmann. It had just, it was an amazing movie. And then he made Phantom of the Paradise, which I loved, which was a kind of a rock and roll Phantom of the Opera. And so I was head of the film committee on campus at the University of South Carolina. We ran a movie theater on campus, and I decided we're going to have a Brian DePalma Film Festival, and I'm going to try to get him to come. And I subscribed to Hollywood Reporter back then, and they had production charts, and there was a film called Carrie that was in early stages of pre-production, and they were casting, and it had a phone number for the casting office in Los Angeles. Yeah. And I called up that number, and they put him right on. I'm like, that would never in a million years happen nowadays. Anyway, I explained what was going on. He said, hey, I live in New York. I'm broke. I really need to get some stuff at my apartment. So if you can give me the airfare from LA to South Carolina to New York and then back to LA, I'll come for the triangle airfare. And I said, done. So he comes out to the University of South Carolina. This is in 1975. And in the middle of him prepping Carrie, and by the way, that casting session was the most famous casting session in the history of cinema because Brian De Palma and George Lucas were sitting at a table side by side reading every young actor in Hollywood for Star Wars and Carrie. Oh, and literally everyone who came in read scenes from both movies. And that's what I got him on a break, in the middle of that. So anyway, he comes out. I take him around to film classes. He had finished a film called Deja Vu, which got retitled Obsession, but it hadn't been retitled yet. He was calling it Deja Vu.
And Genevieve.
And yes, Genevieve Bujold and Cliff Robertson and John Lithgow. Anyway, he had just literally finished the scoring sessions with Bernard Herrmann again, and he had a little cassette tape of some of the cues, and the movie didn't come out for another 9 months. So we got this preview where he was in a film class playing, one of the incredible cues from that score, which is one of Herrmann's most incredible scores. And he is storyboarding the scene with chalk on the blackboard for us and telling us how he prepared everything. It was unbelievable. So that's how I met De Palma. And then, he went off and made Carrie, and that came out and was also Obsession came out like within a month of each other. And it was just this 1-2 punch. Obsession came out first, got rave reviews, did pretty well business-wise for Columbia Pictures. And then Carrie came out and was a massive hit for United Artists. And now suddenly Brian was a bankable director. I mean, up until then, his films were, hadn't done all that well. They were sort of, smaller releases. Yeah. And his buddies like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, were having all these giant hits. And so he was like itching to have a hit. And finally with Carrie, it really put him up over the edge.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I knew that his next film after Carrie was The Fury. And so now I had his number, and I called him up and I said, I'm going to be on my summer break between my junior and senior year. when you're making The Fury in Chicago, can I please come up there and be, you know, a production assistant or anything? And he said, sure, come on up. And so that's what I did on my summer break. And that was my first professional gig in the film business, and got to work on that and meet. And by the way, I worked on it as a production assistant, as an extra. I can be seen in almost every single shot of the amusement park sequence because I made sure I got in there.
Oh, that was the indoor amusement park.
The indoor amusement park, filmed at Old Chicago, which doesn't exist anymore. And the rides start going crazy as Andrew Stevens walks through with his telekinesis.
With the veins on his head.
Yes, with those veins in his head. Which, by the way, those veins in the head were designed by Dick Smith, famous for The Exorcist. He was busy doing another film, and so William Tuttle was the makeup artist who actually applied it. And William Tuttle was a little bit older generation makeup artist and had done like The Seven Faces of Dr. Lau and, you know, all these great makeup films. And so it was really interesting to watch them do all those appliances and everything. But also I got an assignment from Cinefantastique magazine to do a journal on the making of the film, which now allowed me to interview, you know, to request interviews one-on-one with each of the stars, Kirk Douglas, John Cassavetes, Amy Irving, Carrie Snodgrass, I mean, Charles Durning, just the most amazing cast. And then in a small part was William Finley, who was the Phantom of the Paradise, and Doctor and Sisters, and just on and on and on. I mean, it was just another incredible experience. And so then when we finished that, I go back to school for my senior year and at the University of South Carolina, and trying to graduate so I can get out in the real world. And DePalma was spending that spring of '78 teaching a screenwriting course at Sarah Lawrence College, which I didn't even know about. If I had known that, I probably would have tried to transfer to that school. But at the end of the semester, he called me up and he said, "You're about to graduate, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Well, I just finished teaching this course, and the class collaborated on a script called Home Movies based on a treatment of mine. And now we want to make it as a low budget film this summer. And I want you to come up and work on it." And I'm like, hell yes. So I get on the plane, go up there, and I figure I'm going to be a production assistant and maybe an extra, and maybe I'll try to get an assignment to write about it, you know, for a magazine or whatever. And I arrive there. They're going to shoot a lot of it out on the campus of Sarah Lawrence, is one of the locations. And he said, "You're going to be the associate producer and production manager." So he was just going to throw me into the deep end and see if I could swim. And he had some of the students working in different capacities in the crew, but we also had mixed in with professionals. And the cast was, you know, Kirk Douglas, Nancy Allen, Keith Gordon, Mary Davenport, Vincent Gardenia, Garrett Graham, who was Beef in Phantom of the Paradise. Again, just incredible cast. And the investors, it was a $500,000 budget, and Brian put up $100,000. He got his buddies, Steven Spielberg, to put up $100,000. George Lucas put up $100,000. Kirk Douglas put up $100,000, and then we had another $100,000 that we raised from smaller investors and friends and everything. And we made the movie, and it's called Home Movies. Not that many people have seen it. It got released by United Artists Classics, and it needs to be out on Blu-ray. And
yes, it does. I have to say, I was going to wait. But I'm in the process of moving now, so I don't have my albums right here. But I used to collect soundtrack albums.
There you go. And
I have Home Movies. Oh my God, he's another brilliant one. I tell you, I have all the DePalma soundtracks, albums, and jumping to The Fury just for a second. That's my favorite.
John Williams.
John Williams'
score was unbelievable. I think it's one of his best scores. Yeah. No, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And if you want to hear all my stories about The Fury, and I have quite a few, get the European Blu-ray that
Arrow.
And there's a 50-minute, that's 50-minute interview with me and the extras that I just recall every story I can think of making that movie.
Everybody, you have to buy it, because I actually bought it, and I've watched it again several times. It's brilliant. So you have to see this. You have to go to arrow.com, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I told you I didn't have to touch you to hurt you.
Irvin, please stop.
In addition to all the cameras getting different angles of John Cassavetes, we had one from the ceiling shooting down on him.
Cassavetes says to me, "Aren't you glad you didn't bother going to acting school for this?"
I think it's one of DePalma's better films and certainly underrated.
You put in what's known as cobalt blue contact lenses.
I said, sure, why not? And I've been trying to cut it out of the film ever since, but he won't let go of it.
It's about trust and devotion and betrayals.
So I had some truth to bring to the role that I could relate to and believe in it.
And then they also included in the extras on that my first short film that I wrote, directed, and produced called Double Negative, and it has Bill Finley, the Phantom of the Paradise, in the cast. Yeah. Wayne Knight, who was Newman on Seinfeld, Bill Randolph, who was the cab driver in Dressed to Kill, Justin Henry, who was the little boy in Kramer versus Kramer. And so it's a really cool little short film about a horror movie film director who's making a low-budget horror film called Coat Hanger Massacre. And his producers, played by Bill Finley and Wayne Knight, decide that the movie's so bad they would rather steal the negative from the lab and collect the insurance than to finish the film. So the director and his leading lady find out about this scheme, and they're going to beat them to the crime to protect their film. And anyway, it got, I made it in 35 millimeter, and it got theatrical play. It opened with Martin Scorsese's After Hours in LA, and in New York, it played with John Borman's Emerald Forest, and got a really, really nice review from Janet Maslin in the New York Times, and that I was able to then use as my showpiece and everything to get my first feature off the ground. Now, one other thing before we leave DePalma is Dressed to Kill.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, Dressed to Kill.
After The Fury, then, and Home Movies, then I became Brian's full-time assistant. He hired me as his full-time assistant, and I worked on Dressed to Kill and a number of other projects in development that like Blowout. But then even Prince of the City, he worked on for a year and ended up not directing it. It ended up being directed by Sidney Lumet. But anyway, Dressed to Kill was just an amazing experience. I just wrote a 150,000 word article on all my memories about Dressed to Kill. And it's coming out in a magazine called Boobs and Blood. And proceeds from the magazine go to breast cancer, so it's even for a good cause. Yeah. And it's going to be out in December, so look for that magazine. And the editor was so blown. I said, I can cut down the article, and he said, no way, we're going to just devote the entire issue to Dressed to Kill. So it's a Dressed to Kill mini book. Right. So you got to check that out.
Well, that's another, I mean, a classic, Dressed to Kill, and then that you worked on Blowout. Again, that's another movie, I think. That's perfection. I mean. Yeah.
Well,
anyway.
I didn't actually work on the shooting of it, but all the prep of it right up to the time they were about to shoot. And then Brian wanted me to produce a film that another sort of one of the students from Sarah Lawrence College that had co-written the script for Home Movies had written a script and was going to direct it, and had raised some money from family and friends. And Brian said, why don't you go help him get this film made? You produce it. I'll be like the creative consultant, executive producer type on it. And so I went to New Line Cinema and got a meeting with Bob Shea, and it was a slam dunk. And they put up the rest of the money, and we went off and made that movie. And it had Wallace Shawn and Wendy Jo Sperber and Bill Randolph again, the cabbie from Dress to Kill, and also we had the script. We did a sort of a rewrite of the script, or a polish of the script, that Bill Finley, the Phantom of the Paradise, and his wife Susan Finley, they did a rewrite on the script. So there's all these DePalma connections in that film as well, and it's called The First Time.
First Time. Yeah.
It's really hard to find, but
I have it.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry, I sound like such a fan. I'm sorry.
No, that's fantastic. I'm so glad, because not enough people have seen that one. It's one of those lost gems that it hasn't come out on DVD or Blu-ray.
Are you sure it's not on DVD?
If it is,
Smart.
It was probably bootlegged, or it was for a foreign country or something.
I think it was a foreign
release. Yeah, I don't think it's been officially released here.
Okay.
To my knowledge.
Now, what was your first feature?
Well, that was my first feature that I got Home Movies was the first feature that I got a producing credit as associate producer.
Right, but
that was the first time I was the sole producer. But my first feature as a director was Guilty as Charged. And that was with Rod Steiger, Heather Graham, Lauren Hutton, Isaac Hayes, Zelda Rubinstein, the little woman from Poltergeist. Just an amazing cast. I mean, and it was a dream come true, because it was about a madman who kidnaps murderers, puts them on his own death row in the dungeon under his meatpacking plant, and fries them in his own electric chair. And so it's a very dark, comedic film. And unbelievably, one of the reviews that came out actually compared it to James Whale and like the Old Dark House and stuff, and also compared it to the Dr. Fives movies, the Vincent Price movies that I adore. So it's like, holy crap, because that's exactly what I had in mind, was this whole sort of grand guignol sort of atmosphere, and a lot of German expressionism and whatnot in the dungeon that we created. And the electric chair was no normal electric chair. It was like these huge angel wings, and we had this like telephone pole where we had the wires coming over, but we had the pole created where it looks like a crucifix, and it was just over the top all the way around, and it was fabulous.
What is so brilliant about you, and even when I was like going over everything this morning before the interview too, and going, certain things I knew what you did, and other things I said, oh my God, I didn't know he did that. But what you do about the connection with DePalma, and then how it works, where it's the domino effect of connecting with people, and your dream of all the wonderful horror films when you were growing up, and then creating it. I mean, it's wonderful to hear.
It's been, I never had that hit film that sort of, made me into a well-known director, but I've been toiling around in the fringes of the business, doing my own thing, and just having a freaking blast. I've been really blessed and really lucky to have had longevity. I'm 64 now, and I've directed 40 films and produced another 20 films, and then on top of that, an author of books, and I'm always writing for magazines, about my love of different films and whatnot, or doing extras for Blu-rays. I just have a blast. It's what I wanted to do, and it's just in my blood.